Light is so funny. So I just recorded another video not 10 minutes before this. So you'll see this outfit twice. It was a good look today. She could not waste it. Remember these? Yeah, she kept them. I know. Have opinions. It's fine. But I just had to adjust my light. Like, literally finished a video 10 minutes ago. But I didn't need extra light for that one. The sun was perfect in my window. Watch this. 10 minutes difference. The planet is magnificent in its mysteries. But hey, friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, the well-rounded nerd. Today we are going to dig back into our holy text. This is the compendium, the rulebook that came with my Horus Heresy box. And there's another one in that, what's it called? Titanicus box. Words left me. It's a whole other language in Warhammer. Very Latin-y, isn't it? I kind of love it. It appeals to my inner snob. But yeah, so this is the rule book, but the rule book has more than just the rules of the game in it. It has lore. Ooh, it got real bright. Okay. Emperor be praised. But it has lore in it. And we're going through the Primarchs. I mean, there's 18 of them, so that's 18 videos. Just in Primarch lore. I'm not reading the whole book because I don't want the Black Library coming for me, or Citadel Games, or none of that, or the Games Workshop. But I am all about people engaging in the hobby on all levels. Like, some people come into Warhammer for the lore. She came into it for the lore. Some people love tabletop gaming. I know people that don't do the lore or play the game, but they paint figures because they just enjoy it. Good for them. You know, yeah, these aren't real headphones, by the way. There's a whole video on this. I may link it. I may not. She hasn't learned how to do that yet. But yeah, they're not headphones. They're just there to be cute, and they're kind of annoying me. One second, they're coming off. This is better. Yeah, I know people who just paint the armies because a couple of the hobby stores that we go to, a lot of the painters that they have, Warhammer's not their game. They might play D&D, they might play nothing. They might just be really good at painting and they found a way to make a living doing it. Get your coins. I support it. But I do love the lore. Last night, we went to our local hobby shop that we spend the most time at. And on Monday nights, it is a Warhammer night, mainly Aeronautica Imperialis, but everybody will bring other figures depending on when people show up and how many show up. You may have enough people to do a firefight over here, but then a couple of folks might do kill team. You know, we all bring our cases. I have a case now. It makes me so happy. And after I'm done here, I'm going to go work on my pink Emperor's Children. Um, you know who you are. Yeah, they're pink. Come for me. Um, but last night I sat and worked on snipping out my Space Marines while my husband played. And a couple of the guys there, we just got into really good conversation about the lore, like what's going to be next in Warhammer, what happened to certain Primarchs, well, do we believe this is a thing, does the Emperor know that Alpharius Omegon is a twin? Yes, but Rogaldorn did not. So just, it was really good to just dig into lore with lore people. Like, my husband plays the game. He knows none of the lore. He just thinks grots and orcs are funny, and he likes them. I am invested into the lore. And everything, which is what got me back into Warhammer. I play not Warhammer, Magic the Gathering. I got back into playing Magic the Gathering because they make Warhammer decks. There's 4 of them. I love them. And when I read those decks and they match the world, like, it excites me. I'm like, okay, I understand how this works because I understand Warhammer. So yeah, it's about the lore. But the question today is, which of our Primarchs shall we encounter today? So of course we had to start this little series with Horus Lupercal and the Luna Wolves, eventually the Sons of Horus, for reasons. And then, if memory serves me, I moved over into my favorite crazy, Fulgrim. Yeah. You know what? Fulgrim's just out there living his out loud and proud life, and I respect it. Okay? Fulgrim's out there having a great time. And, you know, a lot of folks, when we were talking last night, they said, it doesn't make sense that Fulgrim, you know, turned chaos. And in my head, it kind of makes perfect sense, because he was already a person of excess. And that is what Slanesh offered him, excess beyond excess. All chaos does is present you the more, what's the word? Just a more visceral version of what's already in you. Chaos doesn't corrupt, chaos exploits corruption that's already there. So they got Fulgrim, and Fulgrim is just out there living his best angel exterminatus life, and we respect that on this channel. But then there's other legions that I favor. So who is it today? Who shall we talk about today? The Salamanders. Vulkan Lives. Another great thing about the books you get in these big box sets, the artwork of it all. I mean, come on. I want a flaming cape. How do I get a flaming cape? Katniss had a flaming cape. 18th Legiones Astartes. The Salamanders. In the great war of the Horus Heresy, many deeds of infamy and valor were writ upon the bloody stars. And at the center of this maelstrom lay the Salamander's Legion. Betrayed, struck down, laid low, and yet ever resolute against the foe. There are few legions that have paid such a high price for their loyalty and honor as the Salamanders. There are fewer still who have so willingly and so often shed their own blood in mankind's defense beyond their measure and due. The Salamanders are such a legion. And though driven to near destruction not once, but time and time again, its warriors have each time arisen from the ashes of war, stronger and tempered like the peerless steel blades fashioned in the legendary forges of their homeworld. Unbroken, undefeated, and unstingingly true to their cause. That last word was unstintingly. My God, Warhammer, the words. So the Salamanders are really interesting. One of the things I do love that the creators of Warhammer did was create a lore in which everyone can find themselves. Those are the fantasy properties, whether it's sci-fi or pure fantasy, that last. Those are the ones that endure across time. There is a reason we still read Don Quixote today. There's a reason we still read the Iliad and the Odyssey. You know, and there's a reason that series like The Lord of the Rings has endured. Because people can find themselves in the world, in the characters. When things are too narrow in fiction, it's hard for a broad audience to find that connection to someone that is like them. When we read heroic stories and great tales, we like to envision ourselves as that character, as the one doing the great heroic act. We want to be able to empathize with the characters, or find someone who may be in a similar situation to ourselves and see how they overcame it and were true, or maybe their fall to whatever ruinous power is in that world, why it was justified because X, Y, and Z happened, and that's what happened in my life, so I get it, I understand this character. Warhammer with the Legions did something so very clever because they went beyond the usual tropes of diversity. They created a universe in which anyone can find themselves. You know, and it goes beyond just guys and gals and race. It goes deeper into culture, into morals, into motivational connections. You'll notice that each of the worlds that our Primarchs ended up on when they were scattered throughout the galaxy by chaos, if you know, you know, each of the worlds is very unique to a culture in humanity. But what they did, what the writers of the Black Library did, was make it broad enough to be super inclusive, but narrow enough that I can feel that's about me. I know, right? And then there's multiple legions people can feel connected to. There are 4 legions that I love above all others. The Custodes are their own thing. We're not calling them a legion. And the Adeptas Sororitas, they are their own thing. You know, so then the girls, and then there's the Sisters of Silence as well. They are special. We'll talk about them later. But with the legions themselves, the actual Adeptus Astartes, the men's, these 18 worlds, 20 if you count the 2 missing, these 18 different culture worlds represent broad strokes of current humanity. It is so stinking clever. They didn't go, well, this is the Asian Primarch. It's 2 on the nose. They didn't go, this is the Black Primarch. 2 on the nose. They didn't say that this is the White Primarch. Again, 2 on the nose. Diversity goes beyond just what you see in the physical realm. Diversity is thought, experience, ideas. And that's what you have. And for the physicality that shows up with each of the legions, it's more than just, oh, they this color so we can trap more people into liking this. Like, there's a history to it. And the Khan shows up with a very Asian aesthetic, but it's because of the planet he was on. It's like when the Primarchs landed on their planets, they had the gene print in them to adapt to the world they were in. And then with Vulcan as well, he adapted to the world he was in, because the world that he landed on, Nocturnally, okay, it's not Nocturnally, but the world that he landed on required him to be a certain way. And we're going to get into it as we talk more about Vulcan, but his physicality that was produced, he had a black one. But the reason that he has dark skin and glowing eyes, oh, the lore of it all. And that's where they're so clever. They appeal on deeper levels than just the surface. There's a reason behind why our physicality is the way it is. And that's where you really start to enjoy the diversity that is this tapestry of humanity. There's a reason my skin is darker than my husband's. He's white. I know, shocking. But it's because when the myriad races of people split eons ago, where my ancestors ended up over time, you know, through, you know how people are made. Those traits came out because that was necessary for the environment that they were in. Same things with people who were kind of in like that Upper Mongolia that crossed over into what's now Alaska, Canada, and on down into the Americas. They lived lives that were out of doors. And over time, that created pigmentation that protected you from a life that was very much out of doors all the time. You know, there's a reason that when we look at ethnicities, that people might have a certain kind of hair, or their eyes might be of a similar shade and shape. That is literally, for lack of a better term, breeding over time through isolation and, you know, geographic separation. It's quite interesting to see how so many different people groups evolved. And I always find it really fascinating. This is a total tangent. But when you look at the First Nations people of the Americas, but then you look at those upper Western Asian cultures, before they crossed over, it's like if you look at them like the folks out there in Yakut, up there in Siberia, if you look at them, it's like, okay, you look Mongolian. I hear Russian, but if you got a tan, you'd be a Native American. Like, it is so interesting to see how all these people came together, and that's what they put into the Warhammer lore. All of these bits of how humans became what they are, and that should make you feel more special about you. A lot of genetics had to meet one another for you to be who and what you are today. Do you know how many people had to get together for you to exist in proper order, for you to be here and now and being who you are? That's why there's literally no one else who is you. Even though twins, authors, oh my god, have exact copies of DNA, if they're identical twins, they're still individuals. I think of all the twins. I know a lot of twins. I went to Taekwondo school. Oh my God, the amount of twins at that school. But just because they have the same genetic footprint, they still evolve into being different people. And even though we have similar genetic markers, you still are created as an individual. And that's what I love about the legions, is even though the legions themselves, when the Primarchs take on new legionaries, when there's initiation into the Space Marine ranks, when you read the novels, you get a glimpse into the individuality of every Space Marine, even in the Alpha Legion, which we'll get into them later. I do love me some Alpha Legion. But when you really get into it, it's like, wow. Even in a legion that literally is trying to make everyone a carbon copy of one another, there's still individualism. And amongst these Primarchs, all 1820 of them, they're still individuals. And there's a reason these individuals are the way they are. So, back to where I started this tangent. Ooh, she can talk. Can you imagine working with me? But I am a huge fan of, first and foremost, the Bearers of the Wood. Lorgar did nothing wrong. That is completely the Emperor's fault. I will die on that hill. She loves her some Fulgrim. He's just out there living his best Fulgrim life, and I support it. As I talk about the Salamanders with my Fulgrim lipstick on. I love the Ultramarines used to not. Used to be like, they're the pretty boys. They are the one. They're the kid that always raise their hand. They're the Hermione Grangers of the Space Marines. But when you read more about Robute, first of all, when I learned how to say his name, that kind of did. I was like, Robute, because when you read it, it looks like it says a robot. But I was like, Robute, got to roll the R. Robute, Imperium Secundus, he wasn't wrong. I get it now. But when I saw Robute interact with my other favorite Primarch, Vulcan of the Salamanders, and how he cared for his brother, and what happened to Vulcan, and how his brother tried to save him, and how Vulcan, who had been so mighty, was brought so low. That's a book. But Vulcan is a fighter. Vulcan went through some things. Okay? I'm not going to get all the way into all of them, because you need to read some of these books. Okay? Read the books. If you can't read, Audible. Listen to them. I love me a book on tape. We talked about that last night too. Like, you can't read, listen to it, honey. Listen to it. But Vulcan has quite a story. And I love that they made Vulcan the dark-skinned one with his backstory, because it's the story of triumphing, even though triumphing is not a word, I don't think. I'll find out. It's triumph in the face of insurmountable odds. There was what he was supposed to be, and there's what he became. And even though things still kept going wrong for him, he still kept coming back and fighting. He kept coming back and fighting. He would not be put down. In fact, he is so strong and so unique among the Primarchs that it takes a godlike instrument to put him down. 18 minutes in, let's talk about Vulcan. Trial by fire. The 18th Legion was of one of these so-called trefoil proto-legions. Its early histories in nature and role veiled by edict of the Emperor and his agents. The 18th Legion gene strain showed clearly both in temperament and overtly in physiology. Of particular note was the strength of constitution displayed by a fully developed legionary, which had measurable superiority to the already superhuman Space Marine norms in relation to extreme temperature tolerance, radiological resistance, and cellular repair. That's important. This variant gene also had some unusual outward effects, causing ember-like bioluminescence in their eyes, and a tendency for skin pigmentation to permanently darken in response to prolonged exposure to high levels of potentially harmful radiation as part of the biological defense mechanism, often adopting an unnatural granite-like or obsidian quality with sufficient exposure. They black cause it is a immune response, basically. So on the world where the salamanders are from, Nocturne, it is a radiation heavy world. And Vulcan going there and his gene seed being there, he was someone who was able to rise up. All of the Primarchs have a rise up story on their worlds, each more different than the last and more interesting than the last. But in Vulcan's particular rise up story, he was able to withstand the radiation storms on Nocturne and that world in ways that other people couldn't. Other people had to remain hidden because that world was so treacherous, and it actually makes him stronger. The obstacles of that world physically make him stronger. He shows up with glowing eyes and skin that hardens and darkens and protects him against radiation. And this is the only legion that has that. And remember that regenerative property that they have? Vulcan is so regenerative, meaning like if they get cut or something, they gonna heal. They get stabbed, whatever, brush it off. Never happened. Vulcan's regenerative properties in himself are so strong that he is a perpetual. We only know, at least as far as I've gotten in the lore, I'm sure there are more, but there are only 3 notable perpetuals in the lore of Warhammer that I'm aware of. Don't ask me about fantasy. Okay, she doesn't do fantasy, she does sci-fi side. Okay, we living in 30K and 40K over here. Are we clear? Okay. Don't ask me about no Age of Sigmar. But in being a perpetual means they don't die. If their physical form is destroyed, it's coming back. You could destroy them to the last atom, they are still coming back. There are very few ways to erase a perpetual. There's only 3 that we know of. Vulcan is a perpetual. We find that out by accident. The Emperor is a perpetual. He is the longest lived human that anyone knows about, but he's not only had one body. That's probably why he is still able to be entombed on the Golden Throne, the perpetually alive and dead emperor at the same time. It's a whole thing. And John Grammaticus, which I know people have a love-hate relationship with John Grammaticus, kind of like with the Funko Pops. Like people either love him or hate him. I love John Grammaticus. I love looking for him in the lore. He's like that link that holds everything together, kind of like Uncle Roger is holding together all of food YouTube. John Grammaticus is holding together. He is the link that ties the whole story with the Cabal and everything in Warhammer together. It's really interesting. But John Grammaticus is probably the next longest lived human that we know about to the Emperor. John Grammaticus actually meets the Emperor of Mankind way back in the day, probably around our living history period, like some within 200 years of where we live right now, front or back. He actually meets the Emperor, and the Emperor remembers John Grammaticus because you don't meet a lot of perpetuals because they don't exist. But the Emperor actually looks him dead in his face and says, "You and I are alike." I think that's the only sentence he ever says to him, but you know, in 10,000 years of living, I mean, you're going to remember if you met somebody who was just like you. If there's only one out there Highlandering. With that, these perpetuals have an intertwined fate. The salamanders, kind of like with Fulgrim's Legion had that genetic blight that affected them, and they had to go through so much to fix them, and they still ended up corrupted. Corruption was in them from the beginning. The salamanders had similar challenges. When Vulcan was put in charge of his legion, that legion actually already existed. So a couple of the legions, like 5 of them, I think, I have to go back and look, already were existing before the Emperor found their Primarchs on their worlds. So he had already built up armies and then was looking for their gene father, basically, and would stumble upon them world after world. And on those worlds, you know, when Legione met Primarch, typically they would bow down and be like, "That's our Primarch, woo!" And then the Primarch would look at the Emperor and be like, "That's my daddy, woo!" And then we're one big happy warring family. Didn't always happen that way. There were some of the Primarchs who were like, "I don't know you. I don't know you from Adam. We gonna fight." You know, and I respect that. I respect it. You know, don't just fall for nothing. You need to prove who you are. And catfishing went in there. This is not that channel. But they went through such a trial because that genetic adaptation that they have that protects them, if it becomes overactive, it can also kill them as well. But Vulcan, ends up with a hardy group of survivors as his legionaries. And Vulcan himself, because he put that in them, I think that on a spiritual level, that actually makes him even more of a perpetual. Because Vulcan goes through quite the trial at the hands of one of his brothers, who unwittingly discovers he's a perpetual, in an attempt to, well, off Vulcan when, chaos and treachery happened. Shall we talk about it? Yes, we shall. This nut bar factor 10 right here. Him. Conrad freaking Kurz. The Night Haunter. Ooh, he crazy. And he did Vulcan dirty. So dirty. So, all of the Primarchs kind of have a speciality, if you've noticed. Fulgrim's pretty. Sanguinius is prettier. Angron gonna kill you. They all have a specialty. Well, amongst the Primarchs, there is they each have a talent. So Vulcan has this obsidian skin and glowing eyes, and he can walk through a sun, basically, and he's not gonna die because he's a perpetual. And most of the legionaries, most of his brothers, I think only the Emperor and John Chromaticus kind of know he's a perpetual, and Conrad Kurz finds out by accident. Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, and we'll talk about him more later, he's psychic and crazy. Probably his psychic abilities made him crazy. And then there is Perturabo. He factors in here. So Perturabo is the great builder of the Primarch brothers. He and his legion can literally build like an Olympic football-sized stadium in 6 hours. They are so well coordinated and so talented. And in Perturabo's Inner Sanctum, you see models of mazes and things. Like, he doesn't just build beautiful stadiums. Like, he's like a designer of mazes. Like, if you need to hide a Minotaur and a Medusa in a maze, he's the guy that builds it and can do it in 6 hours. And it will be the size of Texas. Like, that's what they do. For Conrad Kurz, Perturabo builds a ship that's basically an ever-evolving maze. Perturabo doesn't know why Conrad wants the ship. He's just like, whatever, I build. Here you go. Enjoy your ship. What Conrad Kurz did with that ship was capture Vulcan when he discovered that he was a perpetual, and traps him in there and proceeds to hunt him over and over and over again and kill him over and over and over again. I know, right? And as you can imagine, that's going to have an effect on someone. And Vulcan, oh my goodness, he stands up to it. He stands up to it as best he can. But eventually, Kurz does capture Vulcan. And then there's another I forget who it was. I want to say, was it Rogel Dorn? I can't remember. But another Primarch, Conrad Kurz, stowed away on his ship and was hiding from him. Conrad Kurz snuck on his ship, and I want to say it was Dorn's ship, Dorn's flagship, but they had him trapped in a certain part of the ship, and he would go in there every day trying to hunt down Kurz, because he's like, I'm gonna kill this crazy man. Because Kurz was nuts. Kurz offed Vulcan and then discarded him, and then went nuts and just started wreaking havoc across the galaxy in his own special way, much like Fulgrim did. So they are twin souls in that way. But in his maze ship that Conrad Kurz had, he was taking joy at first in hunting down Vulcan and killing him. But eventually it got boring when he realized Vulcan was not going to die. So then he just had him and was just throw him in the fire, feed him to a dragon, throw him into space, and he just kept coming back. But can you imagine what that did to Vulcan psychologically? It happened to him probably hundreds of times, because these are functionally immortal beings anyway, unless something kills them. But for Vulcan, even if something kills him, he comes back. He is so strong, like his mental abilities are as strong as his body. Like they are one. His body is obsidian, but dadgum, so is his spirit. He does this to him over and over again. And eventually, he just jettisons him out into space. And Vulcan, in his now broken state, can you imagine how strong someone has to be to literally be murdered over and over, and they're okay? Like, they make it through? Like, that speaks to how strong he really is. I cannot emphasize that enough. But eventually Vulcan lands in the realms of Ultramar, in the Robute's backyard. And for a little while, I think there's, in that particular book, there's 5 Primarchs in the same space. Although one of them they don't know was there. Because Rogel Dorn had Kurz on his ship, and he goes to see Robute. And then another one, I want to say Sanguinius shows up. I can't remember. It's been a while since I read that particular novel, so forgive me if I'm wrong. But then Vulcan's drop pod that he's in, that Kurz had jettisoned him out into space, lands on Robute's world. And they're like, brother. And then Vulcan's nuts at this point. He's been driven to madness. And he just takes off running. Where John Grammaticus comes in as one of the task that's been given to John Grammaticus by the Cabal, the kind of orchestrators of human history. They trying to make humans not destroy the universe, basically, is to kill Vulcan. And the only way to do that is with a special weapon called a Fulgurite. I think I said that right. Fulgurite. Those are letters that don't belong next to each other. L and G, they don't belong next to each other. That's why English is hard. But it is basically a weapon of the Emperor's energy caught in stone. And that's basically all that can kill a perpetual. And John Grammaticus, in one of the first times you encounter him, he is trying to get this particular thing and then go stick it in Vulcan. And John Grammaticus goes through his own trials. We'll do a whole video just on him. I love me some Grammaticus. But he does eventually accomplish the task. But John Grammaticus himself, being just as long-lived as the Emperor, probably, being a perpetual like Vulcan, he understands what both of them mentally that does to you, to know that you're going to outlive everybody you love. There's actually a scene, like you ready for something dark, trigger warning, where John Grammaticus actually like throws himself out of an airlock after something the Cabal makes him do. Like he can't handle it. He's just like, I'm done. But he knows that's not going to be the end. They're just going to bring him right back, because he's special. He's special. He takes the Fulgurite to Vulcan and ends Vulcan's suffering. One of the strongest, most stalwart of the Astartes Primarchs, driven to madness at the hands of his own brother. But that's a story that plays out a lot in the Horus Heresy, how brother against brother, Primarch against Primarch, where there used to be camaraderie and even love, dare I say, how when chaos exposes that crack in their armor, that leaky part of their soul, and turns them into something they were never meant to be, and then they end up doing things to their brothers they never would have done before. But Vulcan is, even the Emperor recognizes it, the strongest of his sons. And word on the street, well, a little bit of future gossip in the Warhammer world, because we know Horus Heresy is wrapping up. Yeah, I'm sad too. She still has not opened the Siege of Terra. I got it. I know how it ends. We all know how it ends. I'm just not ready to go there yet. I'm not ready for it to end. It's been 20 years of my life. I'm not ready for it to end. What word on the street is they are making space for all these Primarchs to come back. Because at the end of Vulcan's story, we don't know what happened to him. He's missing. We know that he gets fulgurited, but we don't know what happened to him after that. And it seems like they're making space, especially the Primarchs, where we really don't know where they went. Like the Khan just disappeared chasing somebody. We don't know where he went. For all of them to come back and basically rebirth the Imperium. We'll see if that's what happens. But let's wrap up. Vulcan. The Primarch Vulcan. Vulcan was a giant in human form, one of the tallest of the Primarchs and the broadest at the shoulder, armored in emerald scales like a dragon of ancient Terran myth. He was found on Nocturne, a death world of turbulent volcanic fire and radiation, riven by destructive tidal forces of its moon and plagued by predatory megafauna. The Primarch was tempered by this world, as a blade is tempered by flame, and rose to free its adopted people from the external threat of Xenos raiders and enslavers. I like how they did that. It is believed that Vulcan did not become unified with his own legion for some years after his rediscovery, but instead stayed alongside the Emperor under his direct tutelage and studied closely in the weapon forges of Mars, and was with his brother Primarch Ferrus Manus. When Vulcan came to his legion, he remade it as he would fashion a weapon at the forge. In this, he gave the legion its name, taken from the greatest of Nocturne's saurian predators, ancient and deadly creatures whose blood was fire and whose emerald hides were as hard as steel, the salamanders of Nocturne. In this, Vulcan's choice carried a layer of meaning, for not only were Nocturnian salamanders monsters of savage power with great totemic significance to the native people, but as creatures they showed unflinching loyalty to their own blood and offspring. This spoke much to Vulcan's nature, as a man of honor and integrity, who knew a weapon fashioned by skilled hands would never fail its wielder. Don't you love it? Well, if you don't, you should, because it's great. I hope you enjoyed that. I did. I love revisiting all of this lore, especially as I'm building my armies, which is what I'm going to go do now. I'm going to go work on my pink Mark 7 Space Marine units. Fulgrim pink is a color. My Terminators are purple and gold. But them ground troops, they pink. She likes pink. Fulgrim pink exists. It's my army. I want pink Space Marines, so I'm going to have pink Space Marines. And if you want pink Space Marines, dadgummit, you make yourself pink Space Marines, okay? For the algorithm! But as usual, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.